I'm Arlene, 62 years old, and a retired elementary school teacher. For years, I've supported my son Dylan and his fiancée Tiffany financially, including paying their rent while they got established. Last month, I casually asked about their wedding plans, and Tiffany answered the phone with shocking news. "We got married yesterday, just for special people." I was devastated. 1 week later, she called demanding the rent money as if nothing had happened. Before I tell you my response, let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever felt taken for granted by family, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like to follow my journey of finding my voice. I grew up in a close-knit community in Portland, Oregon, where family values were everything. When my husband left me with 3-year-old Dylan, I promised myself my son would never feel the absence of his father in terms of love or provision. Perhaps that was my first mistake, trying to be both parents instead of just being a good mother. For 35 years, I taught 4th grade at Oakwood Elementary. Teaching wasn't just my career, it was my calling. I loved watching children's eyes light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. My classroom was known as a place where struggling students thrived. I won the district's Teacher of the Year award twice, but my proudest achievement was always Dylan. As a single mother on a teacher's salary, our life wasn't luxurious, but we were comfortable. I budgeted carefully packed lunches, shopped sales, and put a little away each month for Dylan's college fund. Our 2-bedroom bungalow was small, but filled with love books and the art projects Dylan created throughout his childhood. Dylan was a bright child, curious and creative. His teachers praised his imagination and social skills, though they sometimes noted he struggled with persistence when tasks became difficult. Looking back, I see now that I may have contributed to this by rushing in too quickly to help, afraid to see him struggle the way I had. When other children had to earn their spending money with chores or part-time jobs, I gave Dylan an allowance without expectations. When he forgot assignments, I stayed up late helping him complete them rather than letting him face the consequences. When other parents enforced limits on video games or social activities, I convinced myself that my son deserved extra freedom because he didn't have a father. "You're such a wonderful mother," my colleagues would say. "Dylan is so lucky to have you." I basked in this praise, never considering that what felt like love might actually be laying the groundwork for entitlement. College decision time arrived faster than I anticipated. Dylan had decent grades, but not scholarship-worthy ones. He was accepted to several state schools, but his heart was set on Westlake University, a private college with tuition nearly triple what I had saved. "Mom, this is my dream school," he pleaded. "Their marketing program is amazing. I'll get much better job opportunities after graduation." I should have discussed realistic options based on our finances. Instead, I took out a second mortgage on our home. "You deserve the best education, sweetie," I told him. "Don't worry about the money, just focus on your studies." Those first tuition bills were shocking, but I tightened my budget even further. No more small indulgences like books or occasional dinners out. I picked up extra tutoring hours on weekends and during summer breaks. Retirement planning took a back seat to Dylan's education. Dylan's college years were a series of calls that always seemed to end with wire transfers. Textbooks cost more than expected. The laptop needed upgrading for specialized software. The car he needed to commute to an unpaid internship required repairs. Each time I dipped deeper into my savings, telling myself it was an investment in his future. His academic path wasn't straightforward. First, he was a business major, then switched to communications, then psychology, before finally settling on marketing in his 3rd year. Each change required additional courses and extended his graduation timeline. 5 years later, he finally had his degree, but my retirement savings were severely depleted. I expected things to improve after graduation. Dylan would find a good job in marketing, begin repaying his student loans, and I could focus on rebuilding my financial security during my final teaching years. Reality proved different. Dylan's first job at a small marketing agency lasted 6 months before he quit, citing creative differences with management. The next position at a startup ended when the company downsized. Each employment gap meant more requests for financial help. "It's just until my next paycheck, Mom. I swear I'll pay you back when this interview comes through. The job market is brutal right now. You don't understand how different things are for my generation." My friends tried to warn me gently. "Arlene, you can't keep supporting him forever," my closest friend Barbara said over coffee one day. "You're enabling dependency, not helping." "He's just going through a rough patch," I defended. "The economy is different now. Kids need more help getting established." Your retirement is in 3 years, Barbara reminded me. Will you have enough to live on after all this? I changed the subject, uncomfortable with the truth in her questions. Looking back, I wish I had listened. By the time I finally retired at 60, my financial cushion had dwindled to a fraction of what financial advisors recommended, and Dylan at 32 still needed regular loans that were never repaid. Dylan met Tiffany at a friend's housewarming party 3 years ago. When he called to tell me about her, his voice had an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, she's amazing," he gushed. "She studied marketing too, but she actually knows what she's doing. She's building this social media presence and has all these plans for brand partnerships. You're going to love her." 2 weeks later, they were officially dating. After a month, he was staying at her place most nights. By the 3-month mark, she had her own drawer at his apartment. I first met Tiffany at a dinner Dylan arranged at my home. She arrived looking like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, flawless makeup. At 28, she was 4 years younger than Dylan, but seemed more polished and confident. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "Dylan talks about you constantly." Throughout dinner, she was charming and attentive, asking questions about my teaching career and complimenting my home, though I caught the subtle undertones in comments like, "This house has such vintage character," and "It's so refreshing to see someone embrace simplicity." When I served the apple pie I'd baked for dessert, Tiffany took a small bite and said, "This is delicious. I usually avoid carbs, but I had to try your home cooking. Dylan said you're so domestic." Something about the way she emphasized domestic made it sound like an outdated concept rather than a compliment, but I brushed it aside, wanting to like the woman who made my son so happy. After dinner, while Dylan cleared the table, Tiffany scrolled through her phone, occasionally turning the screen to show me photos of expensive restaurants, exclusive clubs, and vacation destinations. "This is where we went last weekend," she said, displaying images of a luxury resort. "Dylan deserves the finer things in life, don't you think? He's so talented?" I nodded, wondering how they afforded such outings when Dylan had called just 2 weeks earlier, asking for help with his electricity bill. 3 months after they started dating, Dylan announced they were moving in together. The apartment they chose was in one of the trendiest neighborhoods in the city, and well beyond what their combined incomes could support. "It's an investment in our personal brand," Dylan explained when I expressed concern about the rent. "Tiffany says location is everything for the lifestyle influencer market she's breaking into." 6 months later, they were engaged. Tiffany's ring featured a diamond so large I instantly worried about the cost. When I carefully asked Dylan about it, he waved off my concern. "We got a great financing deal," he said. "Don't worry, Mom, we know what we're doing." The engagement announcement on social media garnered thousands of likes. Tiffany posted professionally shot photos of them in coordinated outfits, Dylan down on one knee against a sunset backdrop. The caption read, "Starting forever with my best friend. Dreams really do come true when you manifest abundance, #blessed, #future Mrs. Parker." A month after their engagement, Dylan called with a request that would alter our relationship forever. "Mom, we're facing a temporary cash flow issue," he began. "Tiffany had to invest in some equipment for her influencer work, and I'm waiting on commissions from a big project. Could you help with our rent for a few months, just until we get established?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. What was supposed to be 3 months of support stretched into 6, then a year, then 2. Each month the request came with a new explanation, a delayed payment from a client, and unexpected car repair medical bills not covered by insurance. Meanwhile, Tiffany's social media continued showcasing an enviable lifestyle: designer clothes, fancy restaurants, weekend getaways. When I gently suggested more affordable living arrangements, Dylan became defensive. "Tiffany needs to maintain a certain image for her career," he explained. "You don't understand how influencer marketing works. The appearance of success leads to actual success." I tried to have a serious financial discussion with them both about 6 months into supporting their rent. "I'm happy to help temporarily," I said, "but my retirement savings aren't unlimited. We need to discuss a timeline for financial independence." Tiffany dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I thought you supported our dreams, Arlene. It feels like you don't believe in us." Dylan put his arm around her. "Mom, we're working so hard. Things are about to take off for both of us. Can't you be patient a little longer?" Faced with their united front of disappointment, I backed down. The monthly transfers continued even as I began cutting back on my own needs, postponing dental work, skipping prescription refills, turning down social invitations that involved spending money. Wedding planning discussions were surprisingly vague. Whenever I asked about dates or venues, they gave non-committal answers. "We're exploring options," Tiffany would say. "Planning takes time when you want everything to be perfect." I offered to help with costs, thinking perhaps financial concerns were delaying their plans. "That's sweet," Tiffany replied. "We'll let you know." Never once did I imagine they would exclude me entirely from the most important day of my son's life. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I was tending to my small garden when I began thinking about Dylan and Tiffany's wedding plans. They had been engaged for nearly 2 years, and whenever I asked about dates, they changed the subject. I decided to be more direct and called Dylan's number to specifically discuss venue options. Tiffany answered on the third ring. "Hello, Arlene," she said casually. "Hi, Tiffany. Is Dylan around? I wanted to talk to you both about wedding venues. I saw that the botanical garden in my neighborhood is booking for next summer, and I thought—" "Oh, that's not necessary," Tiffany interrupted. "We got married yesterday." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of my porch swing to steady myself. What? My voice sounded strange, distant. "We got married yesterday," she repeated, her tone matter of fact. Then came the words that would echo in my mind for months, just for special people. The implication was unmistakable. I wasn't special enough to witness my only child's wedding. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "We wanted something intimate," Tiffany replied. "Dylan, your mom's on the phone. She's asking about the wedding." I heard rustling as Dylan took the phone. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice unnaturally bright. "Yeah, we decided to keep it super simple. Just a courthouse thing with a small celebration after." "But your mother was there," I said, remembering Tiffany's special people comment. "Well, yeah, and a few close friends," he admitted. "Look, Mom, it's not a big deal. We just didn't want all the stress and expense of a big wedding." As we spoke, my phone pinged with a social media notification. Still on the call, I opened it to see Tiffany had just posted wedding photos. Not courthouse photos. Professional photographs of an elegant garden ceremony with at least 50 guests. Tiffany in a designer gown, Dylan in a tuxedo, her parents beaming proudly in the front row, tables decorated with elaborate floral arrangements, a multi-tiered cake, everything but the mother of the groom. "I'm looking at the photos Tiffany just posted," I said, my voice trembling. "That doesn't look like a simple courthouse wedding." Silence on the other end. Then, "Mom, don't make this a bigger deal than it is. We had to keep the guest list tight for budget reasons." "Budget reasons," I repeated numbly. "But you had her entire family there, and professional photography, and catering. Look, I need to go. We're heading out. I'll call you later this week, okay?" He hung up before I could respond. I sat on my porch for hours, phone in hand, staring at more wedding photos as they appeared online. There was Tiffany's mother adjusting her veil, their college friends giving toasts, Dylan's cousins from my side of the family, who must have been sworn to secrecy. Even Dylan's childhood friend Marcus, whom I had practically raised alongside my son during their elementary school years, was there, everyone but me. That evening my phone rang, Dylan's cousin Rachel. "Aunt Arlene," she began hesitantly, "I feel terrible. They made everyone promise not to tell you. Tiffany said you'd try to take over the planning if you knew. I wanted to call you so many times, but Dylan insisted it would ruin everything if you found out." More calls trickled in from family members who had attended, all with similar messages of guilt and confusion about my absence. Each conversation twisted the knife deeper. The photos continued appearing online throughout the week. Tiffany tagged every guest, every vendor, every detail with effusive captions, "The perfect day with the perfect people," and surrounded by everyone who truly matters. I cycled through emotions: shock, devastating hurt, anger, and crushing self-doubt. Where had I gone wrong as a mother? What kind of son excludes the parent who sacrificed everything for him? What had I done to deserve such callous treatment? I called my friend Barbara, barely able to speak through tears, as I explained what happened. "Oh, Arlene," she said gently, "this isn't about you being a bad mother. This is about Dylan and Tiffany being selfish, entitled adults." "But there must have been signs I missed," I insisted. "Something I could have done differently." "You've done nothing but support them, emotionally and financially, for years," Barbara reminded me, "including paying the rent for the apartment where they're probably storing all their wedding gifts right now." Her words struck a chord. For years I had given without limits, money, time, emotional support, and received increasingly less appreciation in return. This wedding exclusion wasn't an isolated incident, but the culmination of a pattern where my role had been reduced to financial provider without the courtesy of basic respect. That realization began a shift in my thinking. As painful as the situation was, perhaps it offered an opportunity to reevaluate my relationship with my son and his new wife. I spent the week in deep reflection, alternating between grief over what had happened and determination to establish healthier boundaries moving forward. Exactly 1 week after discovering I'd been excluded from my son's wedding, my phone buzzed with a text from Tiffany. "Rent due today. Landlord getting impatient." No acknowledgement of the wedding situation. No recognition of my feelings. Just a demand for money. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Tiffany's number. "Hi, Arlene," she said when I answered, her tone casual, as if nothing had happened. "The rent is overdue. Did you transfer it? The landlord's being really annoying about it." I sat at my kitchen table, stunned by her audacity. In the background, I could hear what sounded like a travel show on television. "Actually, we need it ASAP," she continued without waiting for my response. "We're finalizing our honeymoon plans for next week. We found this amazing deal to Miami, but we need to book in the next couple days. The resort has a private beach and—" "Tiffany," I interrupted quietly. "I'm still processing the fact that I wasn't invited to my only son's wedding." There was a brief pause before she responded, her voice taking on a slightly defensive edge. "We explained that already. We wanted something intimate. Anyway, can you send the rent money today? The landlord's threatening late fees." In that moment, something crystallized within me. For years, I had confused financial support with love, enabling with helping. I had allowed my fear of losing my relationship with Dylan to override my own financial security and self-respect. Just that morning, I'd met with my financial advisor who had laid out some uncomfortable truths. "At the current rate of withdrawal from your retirement accounts," he had explained gently, "you'll be completely depleted in less than 8 years. Then what?" The implication was clear. I would become dependent on the very son I had enabled to be dependent on me. The cycle would continue, except I would be the vulnerable one. "Tiffany," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice, "I won't be paying your rent anymore." "What? You can't be serious." Her tone shifted instantly from casual to alarmed. "We're counting on that money. We have an agreement." "We never had an agreement," I corrected her. "I offered to help temporarily 2 years ago. It's time for you and Dylan to stand on your own feet." "Is this because of the wedding?" she demanded. "Are you punishing us for wanting a special day without drama?" I took a deep breath, determined to stay calm. "This isn't punishment. It's a necessary change that probably should have happened long ago. You and Dylan are adults with college degrees and careers. You just had a wedding you could afford without my help. You're planning a luxury honeymoon. You don't need my money for basic housing." "But we budgeted assuming you'd cover rent we can't possibly afford." "You'll need to adjust your budget," I said firmly. "Perhaps postpone the Miami trip, or find a more affordable apartment." "I can't believe you're doing this." Tiffany's voice rose with indignation. "After everything we've been through as a family, Dylan will be devastated." "I'm sure he will be," I acknowledged. "Please tell him he's welcome to call me directly if he wants to discuss this further." "Fine," she snapped. "But don't expect to be part of our lives if this is how you're going to be. Conditional love isn't really love at all, Arlene." The irony of her statement, coming from someone who had just excluded me from the most important day in my son's life but still expected my financial support, was not lost on me. "Goodbye, Tiffany. Congratulations again on your wedding." I ended the call before she could respond. My hands were shaking as I set down the phone. After years of automatically saying yes to every request setting, this boundary felt both terrifying and strangely liberating. I understood there would be consequences, but for the first time in decades, I had prioritized my own well-being over my fear of disappointing others. I waited for Dylan's call, rehearsing what I would say, hoping we could have a mature conversation about financial independence and mutual respect. The call, when it finally came 3 hours later, was nothing like I had imagined. "What the hell, Mom?" he shouted without preamble. "You picked now to cut us off right after our wedding, right before our honeymoon." "Dylan," I began calmly, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about—" "Tiffany is crying," he interrupted. "We can't pay rent without your help, you know that." "You could if you lived in a more affordable place," I pointed out. "Or if you both worked full-time instead of pursuing influencer careers that don't pay the bills." "I can't believe you're saying this." He sounded genuinely shocked. "After I finally found someone who makes me happy. After we finally started building a life together. Now you want to ruin everything because you're jealous you weren't at the wedding." "This isn't about the wedding," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "This is about creating a healthier relationship where you're not financially dependent on me." "Fine," he said after a long pause, "if that's how you want it. but don't expect to be welcome in our home or in our future children's lives if this is how you're going to act. You're choosing money over family." His words cut deep exactly as intended. For a moment, I nearly gave in, nearly offered to send one last rent payment while they figured things out, but I held firm. "I love you, Dylan. That hasn't changed. When you're ready to have a relationship that isn't centered around financial support, I'll be here." He hung up without another word. The silence that followed was deafening. I had anticipated anger, but the totality of the rupture felt overwhelming. That night, I cried myself to sleep questioning my decision and fearing I had lost my son forever. The following days brought no messages, no calls, just a social media post from Tiffany about toxic family members and choosing peace over obligation. I reached out once with a brief text, "I'm here when you're ready to talk." It went unanswered. As painful as the silence was, I forced myself to remember my financial advisor's warnings and my friend Barbara's support. This boundary wasn't selfish. It was necessary for both my financial survival and for Dylan's growth into true independence. "Give it time," Barbara advised when I called her in tears after a week of silence. "They're adjusting to a new reality. It's like withdrawal, uncomfortable but necessary for healing." I clung to her words, hoping that time would indeed heal this wound, while knowing that our relationship would never be quite the same again. The weeks after my decision stretched into months of silence. Dylan and Tiffany blocked me on social media, but I occasionally saw updates through mutual connections. They had canceled their Miami honeymoon. They had moved from their luxury apartment to a smaller place in a less trendy neighborhood. Tiffany had taken a part-time job at a marketing firm, her first steady employment in the 3 years I'd known her. Each piece of news brought mixed emotions. I felt vindicated that they were capable of supporting themselves when necessary, yet deeply saddened by the complete severance of communication. Important dates passed painfully: Dylan's birthday, Thanksgiving, Christmas. I sent cards and modest gifts to their new address, only to have them returned unopened. My friends became my lifeline during this period. Barbara organized weekly dinner gatherings. My former teaching colleague Susan invited me to join her book club. These connections reminded me that I had value beyond my identity as Dylan's mother, something I had nearly forgotten over the years of focusing primarily on his needs. The first major holiday alone was the hardest. I had always decorated extensively for Christmas, maintaining traditions from Dylan's childhood, even after he moved out. That year, I couldn't bring myself to unpack a single ornament. Barbara insisted I join her family for Christmas dinner, but the empty chair where Dylan should have been haunted me throughout the evening. In January, I received an unexpected call from Marcus Dylan's childhood friend who had attended the wedding. "Mrs. Wilson," he began using the name he'd called me since elementary school. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I've been worried about Dylan." Marcus explained that he had grown concerned about Dylan's relationship with Tiffany long before the wedding. "She's very controlling," he said carefully. "She dictates who he spends time with, how he spends his money, even what he wears. The Dylan I knew is disappearing." He described how Tiffany had orchestrated every aspect of the wedding, including the decision to exclude me. "Dylan was really torn up about it," Marcus insisted. "He almost called you the night before to invite you, but Tiffany convinced him you would make a scene and ruin their perfect day." While this information provided some context, it didn't erase the pain or justify Dylan's choices. He was a grown man, not a helpless child. Still, Marcus's call offered a glimmer of hope that the son I raised might still exist beneath the influence of his new wife. With my newfound financial freedom, no longer sending monthly rent payments, I began rebuilding my retirement savings. I also allowed myself small luxuries that had been impossible before a weekend yoga retreat, new walking shoes, fresh flowers for my kitchen table. These simple pleasures reminded me that taking care of myself wasn't selfish, but necessary. I also started seeing the therapist to process my grief and guilt. Dr. Levinson helped me understand that my enabling behavior had contributed to Dylan's sense of entitlement, while also assuring me that his treatment of me went far beyond normal adult-child-parent conflicts. "You're mourning several losses at once," she explained. "The relationship you had, the relationship you hoped for, and your identity as the ever-giving mother. It's natural to feel disoriented." Through therapy, I began recognizing patterns in my relationship with Dylan that stretched back to his childhood, how my fear of him experiencing any discomfort had prevented him from developing resilience and responsibility. In April, 6 months after our estrangement began, I had an unexpected encounter at the farmer's market. I was selecting tomatoes when a voice behind me said, "Arlene, Arlene Wilson." I turned to find myself face to face with Catherine Evans, Tiffany's mother. We had met briefly at family gatherings but had never had meaningful conversations. She had been prominently featured in the wedding photos beaming beside her daughter, while I sat home unaware the event was even happening. "Catherine," I acknowledged with a polite nod, unsure what else to say. "Do you have a moment to talk?" she asked, gesturing toward a nearby bench. "There are some things I think you should know." Over the next hour, Catherine painted a picture that confirmed and expanded on what Marcus had told me. Tiffany had a history of controlling relationships, including with her parents. She had manipulated situations to isolate partners from their support networks, making them increasingly dependent on her emotionally, while simultaneously depending on them financially. "She told us you refused to come to the wedding," Catherine admitted. "Said you disapproved of their relationship and were trying to control Dylan with your money. We had no idea you hadn't been invited until Dylan's cousin mentioned something at the reception." Catherine also revealed that Dylan and Tiffany had been planning to ask me for a substantial down payment for a house. After the honeymoon, I was unknowingly expected to subsidize by continuing to pay their rent. "I love my daughter," she said with a sigh, "but Robert and I have enabled her behavior for too long. We've started setting boundaries too, which is why she's barely speaking to us now." As we parted, Catherine squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing, Arlene. It's painful, but necessary. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for my part in all this." That conversation, while difficult, provided validation that my decision hadn't been an overreaction to wedding hurt, but a necessary step in breaking an unhealthy pattern. It also suggested that Tiffany's control over Dylan might not be as absolute as it seemed, now that multiple sources of financial support were requiring accountability. Through mutual connections, I learned that Dylan had taken a full-time position at a marketing agency, a job he had previously rejected as too corporate and stifling. Tiffany's influencer posts became less frequent and featured fewer luxury items. They were adjusting to financial reality, just as I had hoped they would. As the 8-month mark of our estrangement approached, I received an email that made my heart race. "Mom," it began simply, "I think we need to talk. Just me. No Tiffany. Can I come over next Saturday, Dylan?" I read those few lines a dozen times, hope and apprehension battling within me. This was what I had been waiting for, a chance to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. Yet I also feared disappointment, wondering if this was merely another approach to financial assistance, now that they had exhausted other options. Despite my concerns, I replied with one word, yes. 9 months after being excluded from my son's wedding, I nervously prepared for his visit. I baked his favorite lemon cookies, a tradition from his childhood, but otherwise kept things simple. This wasn't a celebration yet, just a tentative first step toward reconciliation. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath before answering. The man on my porch looked simultaneously familiar and strange. My son, but with new shadows under his eyes and a gravity to his expression I hadn't seen before. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Dylan." I opened the door wider. "Come in." We sat in the living room, awkwardly sipping tea for several minutes, before Dylan finally broke the silence. "I owe you an apology," he began, setting down his cup. "Actually, many apologies. I don't even know where to start." I remained silent, giving him space to continue. "The wedding," he said, staring at his hands. "Excluding you was wrong. Inexcusably wrong. I've been trying to understand why I let that happen, why I went along with something that hurt you so deeply." "I'd like to understand that too," I said gently. Dylan sighed. "Part of it was Tiffany. She convinced me you would try to take over, that you wouldn't approve of her vision. But that's not an excuse. I'm a grown man. I should have stood up for you." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "The bigger truth is that I've been taking you for granted for years. Your financial support, your emotional support, all of it. It was easier to keep taking than to face the reality of adult responsibilities." His candor surprised me. This wasn't the entitled son who had shouted at me months ago when I refused to pay his rent. "What changed?" I asked. "Everything," he admitted. "When you stopped paying our rent, we had to completely restructure our lives. Downsize. Take jobs we previously thought were beneath us. Budget for the first time ever. It was a harsh awakening." He described the challenges of the past months, the arguments with Tiffany, the stress of financial insecurity, the realization of how unprepared he was for adult independence despite being in his 30s. "We started couples counseling," he continued. "At first just to deal with the financial stress, but it's evolved into much more. I'm beginning to see patterns in our relationship, in all my relationships, that aren't healthy. Dylan explained how the counseling had helped him recognize his pattern of dependence, not just on me financially, but on Tiffany emotionally, how he had substituted one form of dependence for another, rather than developing true autonomy. "I'm not saying everything's fixed," he cautioned. "Tiffany and I are still working through a lot. She's resistant to some of the changes I want to make, especially regarding family relationships. But I couldn't continue without at least trying to make things right with you." "I appreciate that," I said, emotion tightening my throat. "These months without contact have been very difficult." "I know," he acknowledged. "I was angry for a long time, blamed you for our financial problems. It was easier than accepting responsibility. But eventually, I had to face some uncomfortable truths about myself." We talked for hours, covering difficult territory we had avoided for years. I shared my perspective on our history of financial entanglement, acknowledging my own role in establishing unhealthy patterns. Dylan spoke about his struggles with adulting and his complicated relationship with Tiffany, who had her own history of family dysfunction. "She's not a villain," he explained. "She's dealing with her own issues and insecurities. The wedding exclusion, that was particularly manipulative, but it came from her fear of not being in control. We're working on that in counseling." By the time he prepared to leave, we had established tentative plans to begin rebuilding our relationship. We would start with weekly phone calls, perhaps dinner in a month, potentially including Tiffany if she was amenable. Small steps toward a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. "I can't promise Tiffany will come around quickly," Dylan warned at the door. "She still feels betrayed by your decision to stop supporting us financially." "I understand," I assured him. "I'm not expecting instant harmony, just honest communication and respect going forward." As he hugged me goodbye, the first physical contact in 9 months, I felt cautiously hopeful. This wasn't the complete reconciliation I had dreamed of during our estrangement, but it was a beginning. 3 months later, we attempted the first dinner with Tiffany included. Her initial coldness gradually thawed over the meal as she realized I wasn't harboring resentment or trying to drive a wedge between them. By dessert, she even shared some genuine laughter as Dylan recounted stories from their new, more modest lifestyle. "I never thought I'd be comparing grocery store coupons," she admitted. "But there's something satisfying about it, like solving a puzzle." It wasn't a perfect evening, but it was progress. As they were leaving, Tiffany hesitated, then turned to me. "I owe you an apology," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. "The wedding, excluding you, was wrong. I was insecure and controlling. I'm working on that." Her apology seemed at least partially genuine, perhaps prompted by therapy or by Dylan's insistence, but still a step in the right direction. Over the following months, our relationship continued to evolve. There were setbacks and difficult conversations, but also growth and increasing honesty. I maintained my financial boundary, which occasionally created tension, but ultimately fostered greater independence and maturity from both Dylan and Tiffany. 1 year after our reconciliation began, Dylan called with unexpected news Tiffany was pregnant. They were going to be parents and I would be a grandmother. "We wanted you to be among the first to know," he said, genuine excitement in his voice. "And Mom, we're doing this on our own. Financially, I mean. We've been saving since we found out. No loans, no handouts. We want to do this right." Those words were perhaps the most healing I could have heard. Confirmation that the difficult boundary I had set had helped catalyze genuine change. When their daughter Emma was born 6 months later, I was in the waiting room, invited, included, respected. As I held my granddaughter for the first time, Tiffany watched with tears in her eyes. "She's going to need her grandmother," she said softly. "We all do." Looking down at Emma's tiny face, I felt the journey come full circle. The pain of exclusion from the wedding had led to necessary changes that made this inclusive moment possible. By stopping the financial support that had seemed like love but actually enabled dysfunction, I had created space for a healthier relationship to grow, one where I could be valued for my presence, not my wallet. 2 years after the wedding that broke my heart, our family isn't perfect. We still navigate occasional tensions and misunderstandings. But we're building something authentic and sustainable, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence or obligation. The painful question, "We got married yesterday, just for special people," eventually led to something truly special, genuine family bonds that aren't contingent on money but on love, respect, and healthy boundaries. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took your generosity for granted? How did you find the courage to prioritize your own well-being? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more about navigating complex family relationships. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need encouragement to establish healthier boundaries in their own relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to say no when saying yes would only continue harmful patterns.